A jury in New York has found that Trump sexually abused and defamed Jean Carroll.
You know, on February 1st, I went to see the president, sat down with him. Unfortunately, it took him 97 days to finally come back.
They will be deployed to hot spots along the border to intercept, to repel, and to turn back migrants who are trying to enter Texas illegally.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We are tracking two significant stories this evening. A verdict in the civil rape trial against former President Trump in Manhattan, and President Biden's meeting with congressional leaders at the White House about the debt ceiling. We'll go to the White House and Capitol Hill in just a moment, but first, a Manhattan jury has found former President Donald Trump liable for sexually abusing and then defaming writer Jean Carroll. The unanimous verdict was reached after about 3 hours of deliberations. Graham Cates has the latest from New York.
A jury found former President Donald Trump liable for sexually abusing the writer Jean Carroll in a New York City department store in the mid-1990s. The jury awarded Carroll $5 million in damages. Carroll has said that she bumped into Trump in a Bergdorf Goodman in New York as she was about to leave it, and that they ultimately walked through the store, engaging in at first playful, joking banter before this light scene turned dark when he assaulted her in a dressing room. Carroll's team called 11 witnesses during the trial, some who testified that she confided to them in the moments and day after the alleged attack. But Trump called no witnesses and did not show up at the trial at all. Ultimately, one of Carroll's attorneys told the jury, "You have to decide whether all 11 of our witnesses committed perjury or whether Trump is lying." And the jury ultimately found that it was Trump who was lying.
Graham Cates in New York, thank you. President Biden held a meeting with congressional leaders on the debt ceiling Tuesday. Democrats want an increase without any conditions attached. Republicans are pushing for spending cuts in addition to raising the debt ceiling. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said time is running out.
Everybody in this meeting reiterated the positions they were at. I didn't see any new movement. The president said the staff should get back together, but I was very clear with the president. We have now just 2 weeks to go.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said even after the meeting, there are still large differences on the debt ceiling.
We explicitly asked Speaker McCarthy, would he take default off the table? He refused. President Biden said he would. Leader Jeffries said he would. Of course, I said I would. But he wouldn't take it off the table.
CBS News senior White House correspondent Ouija Jang joins us now from the North Lawn. Ouija, what's your takeaway there after this meeting?
Well, Major, this is exactly what we expected, frankly, given what both sides were saying going into the meeting. And now the top line coming out of it, you just heard from Speaker Kevin McCarthy, is that there wasn't much movement from either side, that basically they are exactly where they were going in. However, he said the progress that was made was that there was actually a meeting, because he reiterated, he probably said more than a dozen times that for 97 days, he claims that he was asking the president for a meeting to talk about this, to try to reach some sort of a compromise, and that never happened. He claims that the president refused to take a meeting with him. So a lot of this, of course, as you know, is a he said. Right now, the White House is not saying anything, and the president has not issued a statement or made any public remarks. So all we know is what McCarthy is saying. So in addition to saying that there was no movement, he also said that he asked President Biden numerous times whether there was any room for spending cuts, because as you know, the House has passed a bill that attaches lots of spending cuts to raising the debt ceiling. And he said that the White House would not budge on that, and that the president did not give any examples of where there might be. He also said that the leaders, all five of them, the president and the big four there, would meet again on Friday. So that is more progress. But in terms of anything substantive, Major, that will actually raise the debt ceiling in a way that the White House and McCarthy agreed to, no, we do not have that today after about a 1 hour meeting with the president and these four congressional leaders.
Senator Schumer said at the microphones that there might be conversations as soon as tomorrow morning about the budget and appropriations process. Yeah. That would be a separate track, completely divorced from the debt ceiling conversation. Do you get any sense that Republicans will be interested in or showing up at those meetings?
No. I think Speaker McCarthy made very clear in his remarks here after the meeting that he is unwilling to decouple these two things, that his position is solidified. He believes that he has done his job because the bill that the House passed includes a raise of the debt ceiling. He says the onus is now on Democrats to come to the table and work through not only those negotiations, but to realize that they have to stay together. Of course, this is something that Democrats and the president says is not going to happen. He says if a bill like that were to come to his desk, let's say that Congress were to agree on this, that what the Republicans put forth, he said that he would veto it. So I don't think there's any room for negotiating there. But again, it's really hard to see how they're going to solve this in just a couple weeks, whenever the bottom line here is that neither side is willing to give any after today.
Hard to see indeed. Ouija Jang joining us from the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so very much. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now. Scott, what say you from the Capitol Hill perspective?
Everybody's returning here from a meeting talking about how they didn't have any progress in the meeting. Isn't this falling into the normal rhythm of a congressional standoff where the only sign of progress is the promise of more meetings, which Speaker Kevin McCarthy told us it'll likely happen Friday. Another sit down, potentially some staff discussions in between. We heard from Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell after the meeting at the White House, and he made this statement that was equal parts ambiguous, but also confident when he said that we've never defaulted before and we will not default in the future. And I just spoke with Virginia Democratic Senator Mark Warner, who told me he associates himself with Senator McConnell's statements that we just will not default. The outlook is so bleak, the risk is so severe, they won't let it happen. But after this summit meeting confab at the White House, nobody has an idea what the next step forward is towards getting that unique and necessary bipartisan agreement.
Scott, I'm really glad you raised what Senate Minority Leader McConnell said, because at the microphones, Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer both interpreted that as meaning, well, Mitch McConnell has taken default off the table. Only Kevin McCarthy has it on the table. I'm not exactly sure that's what McConnell would say he meant by that, as you said, intentional ambiguity. But did you detect any distance now between where McConnell is and where McCarthy is for the next couple of weeks?
Senator McConnell has had many opportunities to distance himself from the House Republican plan over the past couple of weeks and has seized on none of them, nor do his fellow Republicans in the Senate believe he's doing so now. At this point, Senator McConnell says this is for Speaker McCarthy and the president to work out, and that the Senate takes a back seat. And it's always noteworthy when a Senate leader says the Senate takes a back seat. All of this echoes 2011, Major. We were there when Senator McConnell and then Vice President Biden were the ones who did intervene and avert a debt ceiling disaster and a possible default. Those roles for the Senator McConnell and for other senators don't seem clear at this moment, and that's the sense we're getting post-meeting here at the Capitol.
Scott, there was breaking news this afternoon about the civil verdict in Manhattan against former President Trump. Any reaction on the Hill worth noting?
Yes, there are Republicans who have made some statements in the past couple of hours that are worth underscoring after hearing about this civil trial verdict. Senator John Cornyn of Texas told CBS News in so many words he doesn't think Donald Trump can get elected, that he can't get elected with just his base, and he is not growing his vote total or his prospective vote total. Then John Thune, the number 2 Senate Republican from South Dakota, told CBS News this is starting to add up. The investigations, this trial, and the voters will have to decide whether they can deal with all the drama. It really is an equivocation that we haven't heard Senate Republicans or other Republicans make in the past few weeks, ever since that Trump campaign has started to gain steam in the polls. We'll mark this as interesting and noteworthy, at least for today.
Interesting and noteworthy, indeed. Scott McFarland, thank you. And we will see you tomorrow when you anchor America Decides.
See you then.
Multiple sources confirm for CBS News that federal prosecutors have filed criminal charges against New York Representative George Santos, the Republican whose finances and financial disclosures have been under investigation. The charges were filed in the Eastern District of New York. Sources said Santos is expected to be arraigned in federal court tomorrow morning. With the pandemic-era border policy known as Title 42 set to expire Thursday, what kind of immigration policy, if any, will replace it? And how can the people living at the border prepare for what comes next? Former Texas Congressman Will Hurd joins us to discuss this and much, much more. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. President Biden's meeting with congressional leaders is now over. What will happen in the coming weeks before a possible default? For more, let's bring in former Texas Republican Congressman Will Hurd. Good to see you.
Hey, Major, it's great to be with you, man.
So, if you were in the House Republican conference right now, would you be standing foursquare with Speaker McCarthy in this default showdown with the president?
Well, I don't think we should have a showdown, but McCarthy is right. You know, the House has passed a piece of legislation to move, and the conversations around what should be done we should have been having this more than just 2 weeks before we probably hit the debt ceiling. Unfortunately, in Washington, D.C., things only get done at the very last minute. And so this is the usual brinkmanship that needs to happen. But a bunch of things can be true at the same time. We can't default on our debt. Like this would be disastrous to our economy. It would have greater implications around the world. The Chinese government would try to take advantage of this and try to get more people to stop doing trading in the dollar because they would use this to say that you can't trust the Americans. And we should also be, reducing our debt and the deficit. We can't be spending $1.5 trillion more than we're taking in, and we should be able to address all those things at the same time. But it's a requirement of our leaders coming together and coming up with solutions on doing that. And this dialogue needs to continue. And I hope they meet every single day between now and the debt ceiling gets increased.
Congressman, when you were in the body, you spent a lot of time focused on immigration, not just as a practical matter, but because it was important to your constituents. Title 42, a health care measure imposed by the Trump administration and kept by the Biden administration as a border control piece of policy, expires Thursday. What do you expect to happen after that date? And how would you describe the current situation in your state?
Well, the current situation is a crisis, and it's been that way since the last administration, and it's gotten worse under this administration. Another terrible policy that President Biden continued from the previous administration, the Trump administration, was treating everybody that comes into the country as an asylum seeker. Not everybody qualifies for asylum. Being approved for asylum requires you to be part of a protected class, and your government has to show, you have to prove that your government is persecuting you because you're part of that protected class. Treating everybody as an asylum seeker is what has led to 6.5 million people coming into our country illegally since Joe Biden came into office. It's a crisis. It's impacting our communities. It's impacting philanthropic organizations that are taking care of all these folks that are now in our care. And this is only going to get worse. When you look at what the human smugglers are doing, human smugglers are using this as an advertisement to say, hey, now's the time to come to America. And so we're going to see an increase, I think, like we've never seen before. And unfortunately, this administration is not prepared for this increase. And there are things that the administration and this Department of Homeland Security can be doing right now without Congress in order to address this crisis. And unfortunately, they're not doing them.
The governor of your state has referred many times in the aftermath of mass shootings in Texas to the need to address mental health. It has become his most frequently cited defense of not dealing with access to guns in any restrictive way. Are you comfortable with that approach? And do you believe, Congressman Hurd, that mental health is the only question that looms large over mass shootings in America, specifically those in Texas?
Well, look, we know the metamorphosis of a mass murderer, right? And mental health is one of them, but also access to weapons is another. This is why I think we should have universal background checks. This is why we should raise the age of purchasing long guns to 21, which it is to buy a handgun. We have to address the mental health issue as well. We know a lot of these mass murderers had some childhood trauma. We know there's some triggering events. We also need to make sure that law enforcement is prepared if all these other things fail to happen. Look, I had an A rating from the NRA when I was in Congress. But I also listen to groups like Moms Demand Action, and the fact that half of our teenagers in the United States of America are afraid to go to school because they're worried about getting shot is crazy, and it's something that we shouldn't accept. And so there's no one solution that would have solved or prevented what happened in Allen, Texas a couple of days ago, which would have prevented Uvalde or El Paso a number of years ago or Sutherland Springs. But we should be actively doing a number of issues, and it's everything like I just outlined, in order to deal with this crisis, because our parents shouldn't be mourning the death of their children, and we should be doing everything we can. And again, this is why we elect officials, we elect them to solve problems and to work together and to compromise and bring things forward, not just give hollow words.
Two-part question before I let you go, former Congressman Hurd. One, any reaction to the civil verdict against former President Trump in Manhattan today? And how seriously are you considering a run for the Republican nomination in 2024?
Sure. Look, America's better than this. We can't have a convicted sex abuser, someone that we know lost. Donald Trump had lost the House in 2018. He lost the Senate and the White House in 2020. He prevented a red wave from coming in 2022. You add more baggage to him with being now a convicted sex abuser. America's better than this. The Republican Party is better than this. And if we're going to make sure that this century continues to be an American century, we need leaders that are going to be able to win in November. And unfortunately, that's not going to be Donald Trump. And Major, I will say about my future, I've been lucky to serve my country in a number of ways, whether it was overseas as a CIA officer or to represent my hometown in Congress. If there's ways for me to serve my country again, I'm going to keep those options open.
Fair to say you're considering it?
I'm considering a number of options in order to serve my country. That's for sure.
Former Congressman Will Hurd, thanks so very much.
Thanks, Major.
With the 2024 election cycle moving toward being in full swing, we look at the most consequential races that could determine the balance of power in Washington. It's a big topic. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. As President Biden pursues re-election, his approval rating, bad news at the White House, well, it's hit a new low. Jennifer Horn and John Cott join us now to discuss. Jennifer is a senior fellow at the University of Chicago and previously served as chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party. John is a partner at Capitol Counsel and a former advisor to both Senator Chris Coons, Democrat, Delaware, and Joe Manchin, Democrat, West Virginia. Jennifer, let me start with you. I want to play a little bit of a Super PAC ad sponsored by Liz Cheney's Super PAC to air in New Hampshire about the former president. Let's take a quick listen.
Donald Trump has proven he is unfit for office. Donald Trump is a risk America can never take again.
Jennifer, how do you expect that to land in New Hampshire?
Well, with Republicans, certainly won't land particularly well. The Republican Party in New Hampshire, certainly the leadership and the primary base, the activists, are all in for Donald Trump, and they have been since 2016. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon, in spite of the legal, in spite of the outcome of the civil case that we saw today. Now, for Liz Cheney, in New Hampshire, it's independent voters who really determine the outcome of elections. Republicans and Democrats are always very close in numbers as far as registered voters, but independents almost always exceed either Republicans or Democrats. And that's a status that's kind of given a home for those Republicans who are dissatisfied with Trump. I think it's going to land well with those voters, who could really make a difference in the general election in particular.
But just to clarify, I want to make sure I heard you correctly, Jennifer. You don't believe among base activist Republican voters in New Hampshire, today's civil verdict in Manhattan will have any negative effect for the former president?
I really do not. I don't think it'll have much effect for the president anywhere in the country, frankly. You know, he's got that 28 to 33% of support amongst Republican primary voters. It has been firm almost since the first day that he came down that stupid escalator in New York City. And it hasn't really changed since then. It's the same in New Hampshire as it is in the rest of the country. And I don't think that what we saw today is going to move them. Everything that this president has done over the last 6 or 7 years, everything he has said has not moved them. I don't think this is going to have any impact. Whether or not that changes with other investigations and, you know, what might come out of that over the next 12 months, I don't know. But I don't think what we saw today will probably have any significant impact on his numbers.
And to Jennifer's point, there are, of course, other investigations. John, I want to ask you how, it's one poll, but the Washington Post, ABC News poll, for whatever it's worth to political insiders, matters a lot in the Washington conversation broadly. How bad a news was it for the White House and President Biden?
I don't think it's bad news. Look, he's had some
It's good news.
It's not good news, but he's had some rough poll numbers. But look, he just announced his campaign. He's going to be getting out there more. He's going to be telling the story to the American people of what he's done for the last 2 years, which if you just look at it, he probably is the most impactful president of my lifetime in passing legislation. He now has to get out and sell that to the American people. He has to get the surrogates out there doing it. He has to have all the labor unions. The AFL-CIO is going to play a huge role in this campaign, explaining how great he's been for working class Americans. And
it would also help if people could see the practical results.
Right. And I think you're going to start seeing that. Look, when legislation passes, we all celebrate in D.C. We have parties. We sign the bill. That doesn't actually do anything. It takes a number of months, years sometimes, for that money to get out there and those projects to start happening. And I think that's what you're going to see the campaign based around of, basically a scoreboard campaign. Look at all the things that I've accomplished. So when he goes to Michigan, he can stand in front of a new facility that's opening. When he's in New Hampshire, he can say, I signed this legislation into law, and that's why these jobs are created. That's why this school is better. That's why this road is paved and allowing for more businesses to come in. And that's where I think you'll start seeing the poll numbers tick up. He's just got to get out and sell it.
One consistent pattern in polling data for the last several months has been the country is not psyched up about a Biden-Trump rematch.
Sure.
In Washington, as you well know, John, there's this conversation about would Senator Manchin run as a third-party candidate in that scenario? Would he?
I have no idea. I think
what is your sense?
I think he actually is undecided about what he wants to do. I think
intentionally coy.
I think it comes off as intentionally coy, but one thing I know about him is he doesn't like to focus on politics. He much prefers to focus on legislating. So for him, when the 2022 election ended, his election didn't start. He just saw that as another year that he gets to legislate. So I don't think he's actually focused on it right now. And look, he always told me the thing he decides every day and before every vote is, does it help West Virginia? Does it help the country? And I think at the end of the day, he's going to decide that, but it won't be until December or January. So people can keep asking him. He's just not going to have a decision till then. It'll frustrate people. I know it. But
I for one, will keep asking, and probably
sure
John Cott remained somewhat frustrated. But
Yep.
I appreciate the time. Jennifer Horn, I also want to thank you. Thanks to you both for joining us. That does it for today. You probably know this, but I want to remind you just the same. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And you're also streaming CBS News.